Scott Tannenbaum, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thanks for the invitation, DJ.
Love the book Teams That Work. I do a lot of work with athletic teams. I know this book wasn't specifically written for athletic teams, but there's so much great science and research in there that I'm hoping in today's conversation we can bend some of these valuable lessons to some of the coaches and parents that are listening to the show. There's a lot that I want to get into. A place I like to start first when I have an expert on the show like yourself is just crushing some of the myths out there. So, if we could, what are some of the common misconceptions that perhaps coaches have about building a strong team?
So one of the common myths that I see in a variety of settings is the belief that teamwork is all about getting along, right? If only we can build camaraderie, if we like each other, if we eliminate the conflict and the noise, then our team is going to be awesome. And the research doesn't support that. I mean, although I prefer to work with people I like and enjoy spending time with, it's insufficient, right? There's so many other things that contribute to the effectiveness of teams. And if we focus all our attention on harmony and getting along, we end up with teams that perform suboptimally. In fact, there was some interesting work that was done with symphony orchestras, of all things. And Rich Hackman, who studied them, found that orchestras that at times were a little grumpy actually outperformed other orchestras in the way. So nice to be able to get along. Having a sense of cohesion is good, but it's definitely insufficient.
One thing you say
I
in your
think
book is that chemistry is not an outcome. Chemistry is an outcome, not a starting point. So what I'm saying, what I'm hearing is let's not obsess over it. It'll come with time, but let's not jam that down everybody's throat.
if we do all the other things right in leading our teams, in being good team members, then this chemistry emerges from it and the sense of cohesion emerges from it. The other one that I think is interesting is that sometimes there's this belief at the individual level that I have to make a choice, that I either have to say, I'm going to be a team player or I'm going to try and be an individual star. And again, the research shows that that's not the case, that you could have people who have individual excellence, who are really driving things individually, and still also have what psychologists would call collective orientation, right? Where they care about the teams. One of the places this showed up was with the Australian Special Forces. You're familiar with Special Forces, right? I
Yes.
mean, every country has them. These are like the elite groups. There's no wilting violets there. These are people with individual excellence. And they wanted to know why some people succeeded so well in their training in Special Forces. And they had all these predictions around it. And what they found, one of the top predictors were whether people viewed themselves as team players. That people that joined and went in and viewed themselves as team players actually performed better or more likely to succeed in the training. In fact, it predicted more strongly than physical fitness did.
Wow.
Now, let me explain why. Because nobody out of shape tries out for the Australian Special Forces, right? So physical fitness matters a hell of a lot too. But this idea about being both physically great, individually great, and being a great team player is possible, and we should all be striving for it. I think the third myth I'd like to share with you is the idea that we can team away a lack of talent. You know, I'm a teams guy. I get brought in to work with teams. So people assume that I'm always going to push the team button, right? If we team better, if we're better team players. And let's face it, you know, in sports, talent matters. In business, talent matters. And if you have a significant gap of talent on your team, you can't team it away. You can use teamwork to kind of improve yourself, but significant gaps in talent, we've got to deal with the talent question at the same time we're dealing with the teamwork. So those are three of the biggest ones I would say that apply in business and also apply in sports.
Oh, I love it. Let's double click on one of them. I'll let you choose. You're the guest today. Which one do you think pops up most often? Maybe in the athletic realm, which one do you think is more common? And then we can maybe give some strategies for some coaches or leaders out there.
Well, I think we can pick almost any one of them. I think if we're talking about youth sports, for example, the idea that, you know, I've got to decide whether I'm going to be a team player or not, I think kind of resonates with folks, right? So, you know, I'm not the best player on the team. Maybe all I can do is be kind of the glue guy, or I'm the star. Everyone has to bend to my will around that. So I think, you know, it's healthy, both psychologically healthy. I think it's healthy for the team to have the mindset that we all should be trying to do both, right? Let's say I'm on a team and I'm on the scout squad, right? And my job is really to help make the team better. So that's definitely about being a, kind of a team player. But there's no reason why I also shouldn't be working as hard on my individual excellence and boosting my skills. And there's plenty of stories of players who have emerged from a scout team who have grown and developed physically, athletically, and were able to cross over to the other side. If I say to myself, I'm only going to be a team player, that's unlikely to happen. And this idea that like the team should bend to my will, right? And I am the star on the team, we know how cancerous that can be, right? In a locker room, in a team as well. So I would say, from a coaching perspective and from a family perspective, let's encourage our young athletes to try and be both because it is doable.
Another myth that I remember reading in the book was that great teams never have conflict. I think sometimes we think that the best teams, it's all kumbaya, and that's kind of what you're talking about the team chemistry.
Yeah.
Talk to me
Yeah.
a little bit more about what you have found in your research on just conflict and how great teams work through conflict.
Yeah. So conflict is a dual-edged sword, right? I mean, there's no question in our lives, we've all had experiences where conflict derailed things. Sports, work, family, you could see how that can happen. But we also have been in situations where disagreements have led to like better, greater things, innovation, new ideas, etc. So it's not that we want to avoid conflict. In fact, I would say research shows that conflict can either boost performance or hurt performance, and it's contingent on a few things. One thing it's contingent on is what the majority of the conflicts on our team are about. So you show me a team where the majority of the conflicts are about interpersonal stuff, right? Personal related things. And conflict in that setting is likely to inhibit the team's performance. But you show me a team where we're disagreeing about the way work gets done in the workplace, or in a team setting where we're having healthy conversations about how we want to prepare for this team, for our next opponent, or how we're going to coordinate together, or whether we should be more aggressive in our offensive attack or not. That if we can have healthy conversations about that can actually boost performance under two conditions. One is if there's ample psychological safety on the team. And I'd love to be able to dig into that with you because I think it's just so important in teams, right? But at a high level, psychological safety is a comfort that I can be genuine, that I can speak my mind, that I can admit that I don't know something, that I can ask a question, and my team members are not going to unduly judge me because of it. It's very, very difficult for conflict to improve a team's effectiveness in settings where there's low psychological safety because people hide from it. And the second is the type of conflict, the style in which we approach conflict, right? There's three main styles for approaching conflict. One of them is competition. You probably have a friend that's like this, right? Has to win every argument, right? That's an example of kind of a conflict style, a competitive style of conflict, where it's not about who is right? It's not about what is right, it's about who is right. And I've got to win every single argument. The second is avoidance. And this is back to the thing we talked about already, right? Where conflict is a sign that I'm not being nice. Conflict is a sign that we're failing. So every chance I get, I'm going to try and avoid this. And the third is collaborative conflict. And the research shows the teams that engage in collaborative conflict perform better. What's really interesting is, as I go from state to state, even country to country, and working with groups, there are kind of norms. There are cultural norms. There are company norms. There's probably team norms too. So I'm a New Yorker. You can guess which of the three conflict styles I tend to gravitate towards. I grew up in the city. We disagree about stuff, and you want to win, and it's very competitive. And I have to catch myself at times, right? I then go to Minnesota. And I don't know if you spent any time in Minnesota, but the people there are very nice. And during a meeting, people are not disagreeing. In the hallway, I'm hearing about it afterwards, right? But during the meeting, so when I'm working with a team in New York, I've got to get them to be more civil. And when I'm working with a team in Minnesota, I got to get them to be more vocal around this. And ultimately, thinking about this as a coach or a parent, what I really want to be doing is striving for a form of conflict where the goal is what is right, not who is right. What is best, not whose idea it was. And this means being comfortable building on other people's ideas sometimes. And it also means being acknowledging, right, appreciating that someone offered a dissenting point of view, it doesn't mean I have to agree with you. So you could say, we need to be more aggressive on the attack. We just have to be. And I can say, what a stupid idea, right, which will kill psychological safety. Or I could say, well, DJ, I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a little different perspective than I have. Because the last couple of games, when we got overly aggressive, you notice the counterattack got us. So it's kind of learning, right, starting when you're youth through sports, to be able to have more of a collaborative style of conflict.
Scott, I like what you said right away about reframing conflict, right? We've had a bunch of episodes and conversations about how to have difficult conversations. But what you said in the beginning really struck me a little bit differently. What you said was conflict can either push us forward, it can help us to rise above, or it can help us to spiral and diminish. It reminds me of a story. I had Caroline Burkle on my podcast who competed in the Tokyo Olympics. And before that, she competed at a really, really high level, national champion at the University of Florida. And she told me about this story about her and her coach just weren't getting along, and the year was just dismal. And
Mm-hmm.
she knew it, he knew it, and they were just kind of going back and forth. And then finally, like weeks before the national championship, she finally broke down in his office and they had this 3 hour powwow, just basically unloading all the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, it was a difficult conversation, but after that, she swam the best she's ever swam and it catapulted her into becoming an Olympian. I say all that to say, I think sometimes the avoidance, which I'll put my hand up first, that's a little bit who I am, you avoid it because you think it's going to derail you. But what you're telling me is a mindset shift here. If we can enter this conflict appropriately, who knows? It might bring the team together better than they've ever been before if done the right way.
Not every conflict will boost our team, but show me a team in which there's no conflict, and I'll show you a team that's unlikely to be a champion.
Wow.
Right? That we need a certain amount of constructive friction to become great. And that's particularly true in team settings. And again, I'll keep drawing the parallel. It's true in sports, it's true in business, it's even true in family settings. So for parents who find themselves in a situation where occasionally there's conflict in the family, it's normal. It's helping your kids grow up, but you want to make sure it's less about the interpersonal stuff and more about how we're going to work together, live together, play together. That's where you kind of get the boost.
It reminds me of Dr. Becky Kennedy. She wrote the book, forgetting the name, but she's mega famous right now, talking about how to raise good kids and all this. She's on all these podcasts. One thing that she talks about, I love this image, Scott, where she talks about when we're having conflict with family members, instead of thinking of it, hey, it's you against me, and we're sitting on other sides of the table. Let's sit on the same side of the table and look at this problem together. And we say that out loud. It's like, well, yeah, it's pretty simple. But when you actually do that, and when you're actually going through a conflict and you actually sit on the same side, like proximity wise, you just see things differently. So I'm kind of drawing some parallels there as what you're saying is let's go at this conflict together. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
you against me. It's us against whatever the issue is. I mean, pretty golden advice, whether you're a coach, a spouse, a business partner, wherever it is. Let's be on the same side of the table.
Let me share with you a technique and a story
Please
that
do.
really dates back to my growing up and with my dad. Again, give you the picture growing up in the Bronx. My dad never completed high school, but was a very smart, wise guy. And he and I would engage, we'd get in discussions, and there would be a disagreement. And what my father started doing with me when I got maybe past the age of 5 or 6, he would turn to me at some point and he would say, switch. First time I wasn't sure what he meant by that. What do you mean by switch? He says, we're going to switch sides in this argument because we each have come into this with a point of view on it. And now what I want you to do next is I want you to act like you're me. I want you to take this challenge on and present it from my side, not from your side. And at first I found it a little bit kind of disruptive and bewildering. But what I discovered over time was that when I started to expect that I was going to have to be on the other side, it changed everything. My dad used to say to me, if you can't present an argument from the other side, then you're not really prepared to argue your own side in this. And when I know that you're going to ask me to kind of provide a point of view, I actually listen to you because you know what humans do. If I disagree with you while you're talking, my inside voice is going, when will they stop talking so I can finally say something, right? And I don't process it. But if I know that you're going to say to me, okay, Scott, take my side on this and tell me what you think I'm saying, I have to pay attention. And when you reflect back right? Because then I'll ask you to switch. When you reflect back and say, okay, Scott, here's what I heard you say, and I'm going to act like I'm you, and I realize that there's certain things you're not getting. It says to me, I need to present my point of view differently because it's not coming across clearly. So there's just the technique that I think applies in a lot of settings that provides this kind of mind shift. And then we can come back and say, now let's talk about what we really want to do. It's not like I have to change my side, but if I can't present the other side, I'm missing something.
Great tool, great technique. We'll call it the switch technique. I love it,
The
Scott.
switch. Yep.
Let's double click on psychological safety. This is something that is very apparent to coaches out there. This is something that's very important. The quote that from your book says, "Psychological safety is not about being nice. It's about being able to speak the truth without fear." This goes a couple different ways. Whether we're talking about coach to the team, athlete to athlete, athlete to the coach. The best teams that I've been around have a high degree of psychological safety. I would love to hear some steps on how my coaches can create more psychological safety in the locker room, in the team room, and on the floor.
Yeah. So let me just first say a couple of words about this. It's not being nice because, psychological safety sometimes gets interpreted as to make it safe for you, I have to be nice to you all the time, right? And in fact, it's actually the opposite. It's that I'm creating a place where you can be genuine, you can feel you can be genuine around this. It's not that I have to be nice. So I could tell you things that maybe you don't want to hear, and it's okay to do that. The other way it gets misinterpreted sometimes is as permission to be a jerk. And that's not psychological safety either. I can be cruel, I can be nasty, because it's all in the guise of psychological safety. No. Psychological safety is very much about creating a context where, and the way you could tell if you have this on your team is someone on your team, one of the players able to say, Coach, I don't understand that. Be able to say, Coach, I think it would be better if we did it this way. Or to be able to say, Coach, during the last game, I had a problem with, or can you explain this differently? Or to be able to say, I need assistance on this. I'm not getting it. If your players are never saying that, it's an indication probably that you don't have sufficient psychological safety. And think about the things that promote psychological safety. And we taught prospective commanding officers in the military a bit about some of this. And one of the things that we taught them was when you can acknowledge that you don't know something, leader, coach, admiral, right? When you can acknowledge that, when you can say, I don't understand something, when you could say, I could have done something better, it's a big leap towards being able to enable others. And this idea about the infallible coach, right, is not a healthy position to be in. When you present infallibility, you make it difficult for your players to be able to acknowledge that they're fallible as well. So that's probably one of the most important things to do, is to kind of demonstrate a little bit of your own vulnerability, which in turn makes it easier for your players. The second is how you respond to people when they do it, when they actually open up, will not only affect the psychological safety they are feeling, but the rest of your team will learn vicariously. So I have leaders that sometimes say to me, Scott, I don't understand that. I always give my team the opportunity to speak up, but they don't. And I say, an opportunity to speak up is insufficient. I've got to encourage people to speak up. But secondly, if you reflect on the way you responded to the way when people spoke up, that's maybe driving some of the behavior. So when one person on the team asks a question and the coach says, man, that's a stupid idea. I told you that last week. We don't do that here anymore. Do you get it? And then says, anybody else have any questions? We know what's going to happen next. Right? So this ability to be able to say, appreciate you bringing that up. I have a different perspective is different than my crushing people. Third interesting one in this is, well, not just the role of coaches, but the role of peers, right? And team members around this. Research shows that they play a very big role in kind of enabling that to happen. Anytime I see two team members bad-mouthing a third team member, and I allow it to go unabated, I'm hurting psychological safety. Because the assumption is that there's people that are maybe talking about me and no one's going to stand up for me if no one stands up for this person. So the coach and the locker room shouldn't tolerate this. And when they step up to do that, it actually helps psychological safety. And then one last one that this comes more from the business side, but I'd be interested in your perspective on whether you see a parallel in the sports world. So research shows that teams that have greater role clarity in turn have higher psychological safety and better performance. And the rationale for it in the business world is that if we're on a team together and we both think we have responsibility to do something, and I do it, and you smack my hand and say, that's not yours, Scott, that's mine, I start to withdraw and assume I can't step up and do things. If neither one of us think we have responsibility for it, and as a result, something doesn't get done and we get chastised for it, now I'm hiding. So I think teams in sports, sometimes the roles are clearer than in business, but sometimes they're not. And I think role clarity is another thing that coaches should be on the alert for.
That's fantastic. I totally agree. I think clarity creates connection. I know in your book you say ambiguity kills effectiveness. There's so many times when I'm working with teams and working with athletes and having these sidebar conversations, and a lot of them, they don't know their role. They don't know kind of what they're supposed to be doing. What does coach expect of me? And one of my favorite preseason questions that I like to tell all athletes I work with is ask your coach this question. What are your expectations of me this season? What are your expectations of me this season? It's a
Yeah.
phenomenal question that less than 1% ask, but the ones that do get clarity from the beginning of, oh, this is what he or she expects of me. And because of that, I can stay in alignment with where I need to be. What are your expectations of me this season?
Love that question. And I want to present a parallel from the team perspective because the best teams possess shared mental models, right? And what I mean by that is that if I go and I talk to the team members and I ask them a set of questions, I will get some similar answers from folks. That when I went to a great restaurant in Las Vegas and I watched the kitchen, and the kitchen was performing seamlessly, quietly, one person in the kitchen was actually leaning over and would take his cloth and clean the plate of the person next to him without even asking or looking, right? When we work with surgical teams and we watch somebody in the surgical suite reaching to hand a scalpel, right, before the surgeon even asks for it, that does tell me that they have a shared mental model. When I watch a basketball team and there's a blind pass, and I just know that my power forward is going to be filling the lane, right? There's a shared mental model that exists there, right? So this idea about role clarity at the individual level is important, but it's equally important at the team level, right? And in the case of business, I ask questions like in a team, each person separately, what do you consider to be the team's top priorities right now? And that's an example of a business shared mental model. In teams that are engaged in high reliability settings, like we've done work with the smoke jumpers that jump out of planes into fires, right? We've done work with combat teams. We do work with cancer care teams, deep sea saturation dive teams. These are all teams that if you make mistakes, people can die around this. So the question for them is, if this were to occur, then what? Who is responsible? Who will do what? And if I can ask a team, right, of deep sea saturation divers, that if the umbilical cord that's connecting their diving thing has a problem, if that happens, then who does what? Is it the person in the diving bell? Is it the person that's out at the end of the thing? Is it back on the ship? If I get common answers, right, then I know this is a team with a shared mental model. So let's think about how that is in the sports world, right? I'm a New York Ranger hockey fan. We haven't won much in a long time, right? But I've watched as we've changed coaches and kind of the system changes a little bit. And the question is, how aggressive should a defenseman be in that setting? And when teams get in trouble is when maybe some of the defensemen think they're supposed to be aggressive and some think they're supposed to be playing more conservatively and defensively, and they don't have a shared mental model about it. You could see the breakdown on the ice. And I think that's true in most teams as well. So it's a parallel to your individual question.
And what a great question to ask. Hey, when this happens, I mean, put it in whatever sport you're in, basketball,
Mm-hmm.
football. When we hit some adversity,
Mm-hmm.
how are we going to respond? How are we going to respond? How are we going to talk to each other? What are the words we're going to use? And then tactfully, what's the strategy? What are we going to do when our starting quarterback goes down? This actually happened this year with a team I was consulting with. Starting quarterback goes down for a concussion. The backup quarterback was already out for some other things. So we're down to our third string quarterback. Now, we
Yep.
knew he was going to come in and be the quarterback, but then when we scored a touchdown, it was, oh, wait a second, who's holding this PAT?
Yeah.
Right. And that's all about having the contingency plans. And of course, we figured it out. We were able to be on top of the moment. But I think that's a great lesson. In what I like most about what you said, Scott, was you should be able to say it to the team and everybody should be able to say the same thing back to you. If you're the only one that knows the contingency plan as the coach or the leader, that's an
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah. And some sports unfold more dynamically than others, right? Some are flow sports in which there's things are happening dynamically. So football, I root for the LA Rams. I watch a game and the quarterback throws an interception. And it looks like the quarterback made a bad throw. But in fact, probably when the coach dissects the film, they look at the all 22, the conclusion they're reaching is the receiver didn't read what was happening in the secondary in the same way that the quarterback did. So even though there's a scripted play, as you know, there's also a read that occurs, and the receiver has 3 or 4 options here. And those kind of if then contingencies, maybe not everybody on the team has to be aware of that, but you can think about subgroups in the team who need even deeper level shared mental models. And what are the cues that you're picking up on? Right? This is now kind of advanced thinking in dynamic sports. What are the cues that you're reading as the quarterback and the wide receiver that tells you you should be stopping and settling down into the zone versus continuing to run across the field? Because I think you're going to be settling. You're continuing to run across the field. I throw it to the spot, and the interception occurs.
When you think of psychological safety in your research, Scott, is there any difference that you've seen as far as like gender differences, male, females, or anything that we should know for people that are coaching a women's team versus men's team? Any differences there? Any advice when it comes to psychological safety, male, female?
Well, I would say this: psychological safety matters in single gender and mixed gender teams. So it's not as if psychological safety is predominantly kind of a male phenomenon or a female phenomenon. I think it's about meeting your team where they are. And I don't want to say that all teams of female athletes are the same or all, but if I'm on a team that's already has a certain degree of sensitivity, right? Whether it's a team of male athletes or female athletes, I'm going to have to be doubling down and for a period of time being even increasingly careful in how I respond to someone saying, I don't understand something, coach, or I don't get this, coach, etc. So I wouldn't say it's more the case like, oh, you have to be more alert to this in one gender versus the other, but you have to look for where your team is. And where your team is could be different than the last team you were on. And in fact, this team could be different a month from now than it is now. And I can focus on a kind of a different element of it.
Practically speaking,
Mhm.
should this be something that happens, before practice, during, is it all the time thing? What, in your experience, what is the best kind of setup to create psychological safety? I'm thinking of the coaches out there. They're like, man, I really like this idea. We're really low on psychological safety.
Yeah.
Where can I start?
Yeah. So I think it starts on day one. That's my first opportunity. Not everyone will do it on day one. Maybe we've missed it. Maybe I'm already on day 30 with my team. But if I have the chance on day one, I want to set kind of the tone and the message about what we're going to be about as a team, right? And it's not just about psychological safety, but I think on the front end is really a unique opportunity to be able to set the stage. And it's about establishing the culture that you want to have as a team. So is this going to be a team where people are expected to pick each other up and hold each other accountable and provide feedback to one another? And if so, I want to set the stage on that up front. Is there a goal that we are all striving towards? What is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? Think about a minor league baseball team that not only is trying to win games, but also is serving a developmental purpose, right, for the major league team. Am I being clear about why I'm going to make some decisions as a coach? Because it's not just about, we want to win games here, but it's not just about winning games. I'm going to be looking for developmental opportunities, which means sometimes I may sit you because this person needs to get a chance to get some at bats and get some time in the field around them. It's setting the stage up front about this and establishing ground rules about how we're going to operate. And psychological safety is one of the key elements that shows up there. So what that means is we want to be able to create a place where anybody on this team, players, right, can at any point in time say, I don't get it, I don't understand this, or can turn to another player and say, I think it would be better if. And we've got to be good in how we respond to that. And as a coach, let me tell you now, players, I want to see you do that. When you do that, I'm going to support you. And when I notice that you're not responding in a way that's constructive and healthy to other people on the team, I'm going to give you some feedback on it. We'll get to a good place together. So I think right up front is the first place. And then I think there's a ton of opportunities, particularly as a team practices together. I'm a massive believer, and the research supports this, and the power of conducting debriefs. Write about that a lot in the book. We've done research on this. Teams that engage in periodic debriefs outperform other teams by 20 to 25%. A debrief is, as you probably know, the military does them and they call them after action reviews. But in a sports world, a debrief would be we practice something and now we're going to pause, reflect on what happened, and learn from the experience around it, right? And so, depending upon, we ran a play in practice, it didn't go well. There's an opportunity. The way we handle that situation will set the stage for either ongoing psychological safety or not. And based on the way my coach responds to me, I'm either going to acknowledge that I didn't know something next time or not. So using that example about we practice a play is a football play, and I thought that they were in a man defense, quarterback red zone, and I want to be able to say, hey, when this happened, I couldn't quite read what that was. But if I get crushed for that, next time I won't admit it. So to me, the other place is during debriefs is a really great time for continuing to foster psychological safety. And like you pointed out before, it's not about being nice. It's not that I can't say to you, you misread that. It's doing it in a way that is constructive and makes it okay for you to acknowledge, and I'm going to try and do it differently next time.
I'm so glad you went there because I'm a big believer in there's kind of three steps to success for a team, and it's kind of a fun little framework. I think the best teams, they prepare really well, they perform exceptionally well, and then they reflect even better. And oftentimes, what I'm seeing, and I work with a lot of high school and college teams, it's not the high performers like you are, but we do a really good job at preparing and performing, preparing and perform, preparing and perform. And we totally skip the reflection phase until it's perhaps too late or we've run into some big devastation. And so, what I've done, there's an awesome video about 5 or 6 years ago of Kobe Bryant talking to Lewis Howes. And Lewis asked him, Kobe, what's losing feel like to you? And Kobe says, it's exciting. He's like, what do you mean it's exciting? He goes, it's exciting because there are lessons there. You just got to find them. He said, whether you win or whether you lose, the process should be exactly the same. And the process being the debrief. You should ask yourself 3 questions. This is what I do with my teams. What did you do well?
Mm-hmm.
What do you need to do better? And then how are you going to do it? And so every team I work with, after every single game, we sit down and I make binders for them and we all journal it. And then we talk about it. Well, better, how? I recently had Captain George Dom on my podcast. He used to be a captain for the Blue Angels. And the Blue Angels are really big on the power of debrief. And they all talk about how it starts, the leader will start, but then as the season goes on, basically all the pilots do it all on themselves. And it's never really what we call coach led. Instead, it's player fed. And so they're all having this conversation, and it totally takes away from the coach having to come into the team room and go, you messed up here, you did this, and pointing the finger. They're all bringing it up to the surface as well. And so what I think the brilliance of the whole thing is, at the end of the day, the student athletes will come to the realization or the learning lesson on their own before you have to tell them. And you and I both know that lessons stick so much more when it comes from our brain versus the coach. So much power in the debrief. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, we did a lot in the aviation community, and I would say they are leaders in it, right? But going back to the 80s, there was less of it for them. So there's a place where the cultural norms had to change, and I think it's been fully embraced in the aviation community. I would say, as a coach, that one of the important skills to develop is how to facilitate and lead team debriefs.
Oh, tell me more.
Yeah. So first of all, one of the mistakes that I see is that sometimes they only do it after there's been mistakes. We can learn a lot from debriefing on things that worked. So how come this play worked so well, guys? Why did this time it click? What did we do? How can we extend that? Is a perfectly reasonable way to do a debrief. If you only do them when there's been fails, then debriefs become, let's go to the principal's office. And people are immediately reluctant and close down. So first of all, it's like, let's learn to do these periodically, positive or negative, right? Not just the negative ones. The second is, I want my facilitators to balance what I would call inquiry and advocacy. So inquiry is asking questions. Advocacy is saying what I see and what I think. Sometimes what I've noticed with facilitators is they lean too heavily on advocacy, and they don't do what you described previously, which is they're not getting to what psychologists like to call guided discovery. Guided discovery is very powerful, right? So learning to ask good questions is really the key to being a good facilitator. And the mindset that I like to tell my facilitators is, I want you to strive for guided discovery with you being the safety net. So what do I mean by that? I am going to try and get my team to self-discover by asking questions. So I'm going to go back to the example again with the receiver, right? It's like, so what were you reading there? What were you looking at? What cue were you looking at? How did that differ from what you've done on previous? Aha, it's like if I had looked at the linebacker, I might have gotten straight. Next time, let's make sure we're focusing on the linebacker. We'll both read that. Let's run this play again, right? That's an example of guided discovery. But if my team, even with good guided discovery, doesn't surface and get to the point that they need to, I am the safety net, and I will not let them leave this without getting the information they need. So I'm going to say, actually, after you talked about it, I want to point out one other thing. You've got to be looking at the linebacker. And he's going to give you the cue. So this idea of like, the better I am at inquiry, the less advocacy I need to do. But I am always prepared to do advocacy if my team doesn't come up with it as well.
It kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier about sitting on the same side of the table. When we sit on the same side of the table, it's easier to ask questions. We're facing this issue together versus
Yeah.
if I'm coaching across the table, you just sit and shut up and listen. And I'm just going to tell you all the things you did wrong.
Absolutely. And I would say, when we're practicing, there are things that a player feels, and there are things that a player is thinking about and processing that are invisible to the coach. When the coach is watching from the sideline, there's things that they can see that the players may not be able to see because the players are focused on a kind of a tight space. So I was working with a rugby coach, a national rugby coach, and he was trying to be very respectful of his team. So he was kind of like leading his debriefs in a way that were all about getting information from them. And I thought that was great. But he took it to the level where he wasn't necessarily also providing his point of view. And what I said to him is, who's in a position to know what the players are feeling when they ran that play? He says, they. I said, who's in a position to be able to be aware of what the players were thinking about when they did this? They are. So let's ask them questions about that. But are there things that you were able to see that they're unlikely to be able to see? Patterns. So yes, I said, that is your job. So let's try and draw out as much as we can. And if they don't bring up those things, it's perfectly okay as the facilitator, as the coach, to say, I saw this, you didn't. Let's make sure we're on it.
And you were able to do that through asking questions. I mean, you just see,
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly. Yeah,
that's pretty
exactly.
cool.
And try and do a little bit of discovery learning of my own. Yeah.
I love it. One other area that I want to talk about with you that I see in my work is, and I think we have some parallels here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this kind of this spectrum when I'm working with teams of this task-oriented group and what I call relationship-oriented group.
Yeah.
And it's of my belief that it's good to be in the middle of this kind of this spectrum where, hey, I'm focused on the task at hand, but I'm also in this to build relationships and I want to work with somebody that I care about and we can go further when we go together. What I've seen sometimes, Scott, in my consulting is when you have a group full of people that are all task oriented, it's a little bit cutthroat. I don't care how you feel about me. I don't care the words I say to you. It's all about championship.
Yeah.
If you're in a room full of athletes that are all relationship, we might not win a lot of games, but hey, at the end of the season, we're all happy, except maybe the coach because they need the wins and losses to stay around. I
Mm-hmm.
think this relates to what you talk about with task and team. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd
Yeah.
love to break down as coaches. I'm sure as you're listening as a coach right now, you're like, oh my gosh, I know my task people, I know my relationship people. They're there. Talk to me a little about how you view that and perhaps how we can use it to our advantage as coaches.
Yeah. So let's acknowledge right up front that successful teams are a combination of task work and social integration. That's right, being able to work together. But like I said up front with the myth, it's not simply about liking each other in harmony. So what I've noticed sometimes in the business world is that when a team is struggling in their performance, the coach says, "Let's go to the pub." The coach says, "Let's celebrate Margaret's birthday." And what they're doing is they're tapping into this kind of social cohesion thing, which serves a purpose, but does not deal with issues of role ambiguity, does not deal with lack of talent, does not deal with a lack of shared mental models or misunderstanding about if-thens, right? So I'm very keen on fit for purpose. And what does my team need at this time? And sometimes what my team needs is a real focus on task. right? And to make sure that we're focusing on roles and goals and responsibilities. Now, I can do that in a way that's still not cutthroat, that's respectful, right? But I really need to focus on kind of the task work element of things. There's other times when I really do need to tap into kind of the cohesion, the social cohesion. Psychologists like to make a distinction between social cohesion, which is a connection on an interpersonal basis, and task cohesion, which is a connection on things like goals and what we're trying to accomplish together, et cetera. Research shows that in terms of driving performance, task cohesion is a little bit stronger predictor. And that kind of makes sense around it, right? But now let me think about the nature of the team, right? So in a case of a youth team, this shouldn't be simply about we'll do everything we can in our power to win. Cutthroat is all we need. There should be a social element to this. We're trying to develop young men and young women to kind of also be good people around this. So if we're not doing enough of the social side, we're failing probably in our obligation to develop them as humans around this. We're talking about in the Super Bowl, the social work should be done long before we get to this kind of final planning on things around it. So I do think it's a mix of both. I do think coaches have a responsibility there, but the myth of let's focus a lot on harmony and let's do this like team party thing, probably insufficient in most cases.
And maybe this would be a great place to kind of dovetail. I love the part about team building. So when I come in as a consultant, sometimes I'm asked to come in and let's do a team building event because hey, as a coach, they know themselves well. I'm not the guy or the girl that is the relationship side. I'm very much task side. So I try to hire coaches and bring in consultants that can do what I can't do, which is awesome. Right? You know that about yourself, high level self-awareness. What I like about your part about this in the book is that you say you don't fix a team by doing trust falls. So what's a common team building exercise like a trust fall that's a waste of time? And then perhaps if we can, what should coaches be doing instead?
So let's start first with where is my team today and what do they need, right? And I base all my team, I'll call them team development, TDI, team development interventions. I base them all on kind of what the team needs. So they never need a trust fall. That I can say, right? But having said that, what about a team that seems to be having a problem with role clarity? Like, then the team development really should be focusing on roles. And can we develop, we know from the aviation world, from the medical world, that scenario-based training can be very powerful. So can we take a scenario-based approach to this team development? Now, if I said that to some coaches, the coach would say, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about team building, like having a party or blowing up balloons together, et cetera. It's like, if you want to do that and you want to do that for its fun, that's fine. But if you're asking me to come in and help improve the effectiveness of your team, it seems like the need here is about role clarity, if-then stuff. So let's you and I work together. Let's identify some of the scenarios that'll trigger conversations around what we should be doing, shouldn't be doing, how we handle situations, et cetera. And let's build a team development exercise around this kind of real task related things and how we as a team are going to collaborate, coordinate, shared mental model, et cetera, around it. To me, that's one of the real powerful ways of being able to move forward. And we're borrowing from these other disciplines like healthcare and aviation that have now been doing it for a while and are able to make it work. I am not a big fan in let's create these kind of pseudo situations, the trust fall type of thing. It doesn't necessarily, in my experience, doesn't necessarily translate into greater trust on the field. Trust on the field is I know what you're going to do, you know what I'm going to do, I can count on you, and whether you catch me in the trust fall or not is unlikely to make it happen. I'm just a little reluctant when I don't trust you already, and now you're asking me to fall back into your arms. So
If you could, and if this is secret sauce, we can skip over, but is there, without naming the company, is there an experience that you could take my listeners inside the room of what this looks like and maybe what the result was because of the TDI and maybe kind of what it looked like? Could you bring us in a room of what an example in your past looked
yeah,
like?
so let me give you an example from healthcare. So in this particular instance, this is these are teams that are going through, they're going to do surgery together. Now, what's interesting about surgery is that it's not the same people shoulder to shoulder every day. That it may be that this week the scrub tech is different than next week. Our nurse might be different. Our anesthesiologist might be different. Our surgeon might be different. At some point, it might be interesting to talk about the stability of team membership, right? But in this context, players kind of plug in and plug out. So you want to get them to kind of run through some scenarios together in a safe context where they can learn a bit about how people tend to work. So this is a simulation where there's a mannequin that serves as the patient. And it's all set up in advance with a scenario where this is a normal kind of surgery. And then partway through the surgery, the patient codes. And what the team has to be able to do is shift from normal to emergency settings, right? Think about the equivalent in a sporting event. It's the score's even versus all of a sudden we're way down, we're running out of time. We've got to shift modes around this. And they got to shift simultaneously. So we run this exercise and they make the shift and they do some things well and not so well. And we immediately go into the debriefing room and we start going through the debrief. And one of the questions that came up was, who should have been speaking up? Right? How do we want to handle, if this happens, how do we want to handle speaking up? And the surgeon, who's the senior person in the room, says, well, I thought I made it available that, like it's okay for people to speak up. And the scrub tech, who is the junior most person on this team, to their credit, said something I remember to this day. He said, sir, with all due respect, you surgeons scare the crap out of us. Mm-hmm. He said, I want you to imagine that you're at the mall and you park your car and you're walking towards the building and you walk past a car and the lights are on. And the person's getting out of the car and you say, excuse me, sir, your lights are on. And he says, you idiot, they're automatic shut-off lights. The next day when you're walking into the mall, do you say something when you walk past the car? He said, all you have to do is shut us down once. If any one of you shuts us down once, we won't say a word for 30 days. So the surgeon said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, before we get into the surgical suite, could you just pull down your mask for a second and say, my name is Joe. This is our team, what we're trying to accomplish today. And if you see something or you don't know something, I want you to speak up. There's no dumb questions and no dumb observations. You will then have given me permission to do that. So there's an example of an exercise built around a hypothetical scenario, but realistic, that surfaced something that might have been difficult to surface in another setting. And I think there's a sports equivalent to that.
Man, how much of this, Scott, is great teams do a great job at setting the standards, the communication protocols, and the core principles before we get started? What I'm finding, I get passionate about this because I think so many coaches miss this, is that the best teams lay this out preseason. And the worst teams either don't do it at all or they wait until adversity or devastation hits and they wonder why. Oh, why are we having issues? Well, we never talked about when shit hits the fan, what are we supposed to do? What do you want your parents to do? What do you want the kids to do? How do we go about this? It seems so obvious to me. Is this something that you're seeing too? Is that the best teams, we're talking about teams that work, the best teams are the ones that go through this before we get onto the field, before we put the helmets on? Let's talk about why we're doing what we're doing and what we're going to do if stuff hits the fan. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's first start with an observation. In our lives, we've been on a bunch of teams, some of them more effective than others. And I would say the best teams were not necessarily great on day one, the day they were formed, right? But what the best teams do is they get into a pattern and they do just what you described on the front end. They do initial alignment as best they can with what they know at the moment. So in the case of a sports team, we may not know all the talents of everybody on the team, but based on what I know on the team today, here's where we're starting, right? And they do this initial upfront work around priorities and roles and what's our goal as a team, et cetera, and they try and make it as clear as possible. In the business world, they use the term charters. They'll form team charters sometimes. Some of the best teams do that. Let's capture what we know about what our team is trying to accomplish in our roles and how we're going to work together. That's that back to the cultural question we talked about earlier, like right up front. Remember, day one. I think that's great. But the other thing that great teams do is they get into this pattern of initial alignment. They experience, they huddle up to learn, they make adjustments, and they make sure they have realigned. That last piece is the other place where I see a big drop of the ball, right? And we did work with Microsoft, and they use a lot of project teams. People can be on average as many as 7 teams at Microsoft. So they're juggling multiple things and they're on multiple teams. And as these changes occur, the best teams there, they establish the priorities, they establish the alignment, And then when stuff happened in their project, they didn't assume everybody knew. And they consciously and intentionally realign. So think about the equivalent in the sports world, right? And we've decided that this isn't working for us, and a couple of us have agreed to this, but the rest of the team doesn't know it. And that would be an example of kind of like some learning occurring, right? Maybe good initial alignment, some learning that requires us to change. Not everybody is aware of the change because we haven't officially realigned, and the team gets in trouble and can derail.
When I was reading this phenomenal book, I was thinking about the best teams that I've been around, and specifically the teams that I've had a chance to observe and witness and consult with. One of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I have seen, personally speaking, from the teams that I've worked with, some of the best around, have a coach, specifically a head coach, who is a lifelong learner, who is eager for feedback. Not just, hey, if you got something, tell me. It's coming. They go out of their way to
Yeah.
give me the feedback. And they themselves are trying to become a better human being, not just a coach, but a better human being. That's why they're bringing a consultant or somebody like myself. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I don't think that's, made up. I think that that's true for the best teams, that it starts from the top. I'm a big believer that the coach needs to model the behavior that they want to see from the athletes. A question I love to ask my coaches is, if you want your team to be this, you have to be what? You fill in the blank. If I
Yeah, I
want
love
my
it.
team to be consistent, I need to be consistent. If I
Yeah.
want my team to be calm in chaos, I need to be calm in chaos. Create that uniformity here. Curious, from your research, are you finding the same things? And then to piggyback, what are the characteristics of the coaches of the great teams that you're working with, or leaders if it's a business world? Let's talk to those guys as we close down.
Yeah. So the best coaches model what they want. And one of the key elements is about accountability, right? It's very difficult to have sustained excellence in a team if there's not accountability in the locker room. But if it doesn't start with the coach and the coach holding themselves accountable, you're not going to get this trickling through the organization. So I'm a Sean McVay fan, Los Angeles Rams coach. You watch his press conferences, and he almost always starts with, "This is what my assistant coaches did really well. This is what the players do, and this is what I need to do differently and better."
Wow.
So it starts with him. He's creating this context where everybody in that team, and then you hear the players talk, and the players are like, "I was really helpful that this person on the defense did this, but what I need to do is more of," and there's an illustration that this is a guy who's clearly walking the talk. I've seen this in military settings, In military settings, of course, are very hierarchical. You walk into a room and you know who has the power. You just count the stripes, right? So some of the best military leaders that I've seen, and I've taught at the Naval War College, very senior level folks, right? Some of these best folks, they are willing to acknowledge their own limitations to set the stage so that others in turn can acknowledge their own limitations. And I'll take this a step further, which is a little bit beyond the concept of kind of being a great leader here, but also about being a great team, is great teams typically have some degree of shared leadership. And by that, in some cases, it's not an official appointment, right? But as I watch teams, I look to see the extent to which people on the team step up and demonstrate leadership behaviors. Not whether they have the stripes, not whether they're the official leader. And you can think about it on the sports teams you've been on, where like there's this person on the team, and they're like the second coach. There's a voice that shows up, and it's not their official job. So for coaches, I also ask the question, how are you using your captains, right? How are you picking your captains? Are these folks that are high in what we would call collective orientation, meaning their team first? Are they the folks that are demonstrating first into practice, last out of practice? Are they holding themselves accountable? Are they acknowledging when they don't know stuff? Are they volunteering to help? All these things that we know great team members do starts with the coach showing it, then assistant coaches. But I want to have a locker room that's also doing their own accountability, because it's very difficult for the coach to see everything and be every place. The best teams, it's happening with the players as well.
That's awesome. There's a question that came out a couple of weeks ago that stopped me in my tracks for coaches. And the question goes like this, Scott. I think you'll appreciate this. What do you not like in your team, and how can you fix that in yourself? I'll say it again for coaches listening. What
Yeah.
do you not like in your team, and
Mhm.
how can you fix that in yourself? Because oftentimes our team is a direct representation or a trickle down model of who we are. What do you think about that
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. I love it. I love it. And what you're really asking the leader to do in that case is a first some personal introspection, right? Because you're familiar with the concept of narcissism, right? And for narcissists, first of all, it's all about them. And secondly, they take credit for good things and they blame others around this. And so when problems occur, they're unlikely to acknowledge their role in it in any way. Now, most people aren't narcissists, but we all have a little bit of narcissism in us. And it's really difficult at times to acknowledge our own role in a team not being successful. It's a lot easier to be able to point to others. So I love the idea about what is it you want to see and how are you either contributing or not contributing to that? And what can you change that will help that in some way? I think that's a really good and powerful coaching question to be asked.
Scott, this has been awesome. I have a ton of notes written down. My coaches listen, and I know that they're going to absolutely eat this up. There's a lot. I like to always end my podcast episode, Scott, with some sort of piece of advice or something that you can go do today, whether it's one thing or two things. And we've given probably a dozen here. But for the coaches listening right now, if they don't get anything out of this conversation, maybe they're just tuning in now. Scott, what's one thing my coaches can do to create a team that works and a team that is effective? What's one of your top strategies? Hey, go do this right now.
Yeah, the drum I'm going to beat is about debriefing on this, right? That if there's only one thing you take away from this, it's that the best teams learn and adapt, right? And without feedback and without reflection, teams do not learn. I could put you on a bowling alley and I can let you bowl for 2 weeks. But if I put blindfolds on you and earplugs, you will not be a better bowler in 2 weeks than you were today. Practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes things better. And part of perfect practice is getting into a routine, rigor of being able to conduct periodic debriefs in which you as the coach are using guided discovery, asking good questions, and serving as that safety net so that if they don't bring it up, you make sure they don't leave without hearing it. That would be the biggest takeaway, I would say.
And when you do that so long that it becomes a habit, whoo, you got something dangerous, man, something magical. When a team just does that and that's just what we do after every game, man, you got something.
And the team members sometimes will huddle up on their own and do it. Yeah. That's a sign that it's really part of the team culture.
Scott, a lot of fun. Love this conversation. Love the book. How can my listeners best support you?
I'd say be good coaches. I'm at a point where I get the joy out of my work is in seeing coaches do a great job and helping their teams be more successful. So, if taking a look at the book would be helpful to them, I'd say go buy the book, available on Amazon, etc. But really right now I'm at the point where I just want to see coaches do a great job.
Awesome, man. You and I both have a passion in that sense. The book, Teams That Work, The 7 Drivers of Team Effectiveness. We did a good job going over some of the main points, but there's so much in this book. So if you're a coach out there looking to build the effectiveness of your team, the cohesion, the chemistry, grab this book. It is phenomenal. Scott, thanks for the time, man. This is fun.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks again for the invitation.